Hello and good afternoon, everyone. At least good afternoon from where I am in the world. We have a slightly different setup for today's show, and I want to welcome you all this afternoon, and I guess for some of you also this evening. So today we have a very different setup. As I said, we actually have Mr. Klaus Leopold and Kulawat Wongsaroj joining us live from Thailand. Despite the fact that it looks like they are sitting in slightly different rooms, it's actually that they are sitting next to each other and they can even high five if they wanted, something like this. Cool. So, welcome, Klaus and Kulawat. Do you want to say hi quickly?
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Kulawat from Bangkok.
And Klaus from Bangkok. Here we are.
Nice to
Cool.
see you.
Yeah, so you guys have been hanging out, actually running some flight levels workshops and doing all kinds of interesting flight levels things. Yeah, and enjoying some slightly warmer weather, which is funny because that's also what I'm doing, but I'm doing it in the south of the world. So I'm actually in Cape Town, South Africa. So we have a completely different set of locations compared to usual, which is quite nice. Cool.
Yes.
So welcome to everybody who's joining us on the live stream. For those of you who are joining for the first time, I have a couple of things that I can say just to kind of get us started. The first is, as we go, I want to encourage you, ask as many questions as you can inside the chat. That'll help us to shape the conversation in an interesting direction. So please fire off your questions in the chat. We'll weave them into the conversation as we go. And the second thing, of course, is to promote ourselves a little bit. So if you enjoy the video that we are doing and all of the stuff that we are up to here, it would be super cool if you would hit like and subscribe. Really helps us to get the word out there about flight levels and everything that we're doing. Cool. So advertising break done. Shall we jump into kind of the first questions and see where we go from there?
Sure.
So the topic is flight level 2 design, which of course is one of the things that is quite unique about flight levels. I'm curious, maybe we could start by saying, well, let's explore this question of, well, what questions does flight, or at least what problems does flight level 2 help to address? So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts on this. What problems does flight level 2 help to address?
I think that's a question.
Interestingly, I was talking to quite a few participants in the class today, and some of them already doing quite agile transformation, if you may. And one of the, I would say, behavior that I've seen, I don't know if anyone defined this word, but I would call it a scrum silo. People, just what a lot of probably in Bangkok we call squad silo. Squad is so popular these days, and that's people trying to do agile transformation. They start to work in agile. They spinning really fast, and then they do make them feel good a little bit that they got an improvement, but at overall it doesn't seem to see the flow of big picture improvement. And I think that's what flight level 2 can help.
Yeah, so especially across teams, right? And that's also what, so Kulawat and I, and actually Kamon, who is backstage somewhere here. we just finished a flight level 2 design class, like Kulawat just said before. And if you just take a look at the companies who attended there and all, so we were building real systems during the class. Each and every system had one thing in common. It was always across teams. So multiple teams were involved, and it was always the same problem, actually. So like, how do we coordinate so that we get the stuff delivered? So I would say flight level 2 is really like coordination of value. And in the company context, it's always across multiple teams, I think.
Mm-hmm. So I hear this question quite often is, obviously I like to sort of start with this framing of, well, what are we trying to solve or address? But the question that often comes up is, well, how do we decide where to start? What sort of, I guess, how do you decide that there is some value in having that flight level 2 system? What is the sort of starting framing point? How do you figure out what the value streams or product streams are? Yeah.
We hit it where it hurts. When the where's the pain is. And well, most of the people that I've been talking to, they start with Scrum with Agile, right? And most of them are in IT. That's usually where Agile begins. But they should usually struggle with how would they reach out for the PO or the business side or the customer, right? And that's like from the upstream. And also when would they release it out to the downstream, and if they're lucky, they could expand their flow to a bit more end to end. But most of the people that I'm talking to, they struggle to reach out to expand this, to make it more end to end. I think we can start by looking at the value that agile team that you implementing try to actually produce. If you actually reach to the end customer, you actually get the input from the real business. How can we link this, make it an end-to-end, really end-to-end flow?
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And you were talking about IT. Just if we take a look of what was going on in this workshop, there was also some companies outside of IT. Are we actually allowed to talk about the?
I think so. I think they will be talking at a conference in this weekend anyway. So I think they would like to get the words across.
We can beep it out later if it's a problem or something like that.
Later, because it's just live. No, but they are also talking on the conference on Saturday. So, but that's really cool. So it has this use case has really nothing to do with IT. They are actually they are developing a COVID-19 vaccine here. It's a kind of Thai government, and you can imagine that's totally different than IT, but still they have similar problems. You have a bunch of real specialists. I mean, this is really real specialists. And it's of course a group of multiple teams, multiple departments, multiple disciplines actually that needs to collaborate together, and they're solving it with a Flight Level 2 system actually, which is really cool. They actually have developed a Flight Level 2 system. I think there's already one in place, but they already they developed another one here in the course, and it's really cool to see, because if you have an IT background and you see the columns, it's really like, I don't understand what's going on here, but it's really it's kind of cool.
Now you mentioned it, it remind me of something. I think last year or year before, I forget, we start to help one of the customer doing some agile thing, and this is basically they don't have any software development in the company, right? It's a medical equipment company, buy and sell. We don't even produce it because they import it from their mothership somewhere in Switzerland, right? And the thing is, we start by just having a big stand up between all the let's say a supervisor, just to share what about learning that they have each week. But then we start to see a theme of what kind of problem that's popping up. A lot of weeks after week, they got complain about installation. When I say installation, they install a medical equipment to a hospital, right? So this is quite a long-term big project, right? So that one installation is one project for them, right? So we start hearing about coordination problem, and to install something, you need to start from getting order from the sales, and then talk to the engineer to schedule, get the specialist to install some software, they even renovate the area. So there's a lot of coordination going on. So that's where we offer them, how about starting some coordination visualization board about this problem, right? And they start to come together and define a basic of a Kanban board, basically, and put in who's involved and visualize it. And it's actually got me a goosebump that we when take a look back, there was a guy that's he's a head of engineering, saying that he used to spend his whole Saturday morning replanning every week because when things change, it's felt like domino, right? Now that he doesn't have to do that, because everyone come together and just planning together. And that's kind of help them, make a better flow of this installation, which is actually the main revenue of the company.
I saw this a couple of times. When you start to bring those connections together, that it's no longer about just the IT or marketing or sales or something like that. Like actually bringing, as Klaus likes to say, sort of connecting the agile islands of the organization back together. And it was reminding me of a scenario at Spotify where we were doing some work between a payments team and actually some folks in the marketing side. And having that collaboration starts to create the similar sort of thing where you don't have to replan the whole world every Saturday, like your poor person was doing. So yeah, very, very much like that. There's actually a really cool question in the chat. Julio Gonzalez is asking, he says, show the question for you there. It says, does flight levels help? Firstly, he says hello from Lima, Peru. So hello from Cape Town and Bangkok. Does flight level 2 help in shared services? The one that is shared, across all the organizations as capacity. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this question?
Should I?
Yes, you go. To me, it's actually help directly because most of the time, the share service is the one that everybody's go to, right? You need it the most in the organization, and if you unlucky, you become a bottleneck because everyone's kind of waiting on you. But to move the focus from that's just like one small picture of how the service is used. But if you look from business or value stream, value flow perspective, right? So shift the focus on what the priority and how can the share team participate in that. So instead of having everyone try to prioritize for you and whoever yell the loudest got the work first. Now it's kind of put everyone into focus on a bigger picture and help reduce the load of the share service.
So the answer would be yes, it helps. So if they are joining the flight level 2 to a certain extent, we also have to say and the and is as shared service is a shared service. This means not only one flight level 2 system, which is maybe a product as a service or something like this. Not only one flight level 2 system needs the shared service. Maybe, I don't know, 20 products or / flight level 2 system needs this service. Then it's getting a little bit tricky. Because if we think that one point of coordination would be a standard meeting, this would mean that this representative of this shared service would need to go to 20 standard meetings of 20 flight level 2 systems. Well, in a job description, you would write down you need to be able to attend standard meetings because that's what you're doing the entire day. So if the situation is something like this, we need to zoom out a little bit and we would solve this on a portfolio level, like on an operational portfolio, which again is actually a flight level 2 systems. So yes, you can actually solve it on a flight level 2 system, but the question is on which layer or kind of.
Well, when you're saying that, I got quite a few question or confusion. Do we have like a level 2.5 because it's a coordinate level 2 with another level 2?
But I love it. I mean, this is a question that pops up again and again and again, right? So, but we don't have only one flight level 2 system. We have another layer of flight level 2. So this is flight level 3 now, right? And we actually have 4 flight levels. So we have flight level 4, 3, 2, 1. Or no, we have even 5 flight levels. Or do we have flight level 2.5? So this is one of these, I would say, misunderstandings. There is only one flight level 2, one level actually. You can have multiple systems and you can even have hierarchies on the flight level 2, but it's still a flight level 2. Because flight level 2 is about end-to-end coordination. Flight level 1 is about operation, and flight level 3 is about strategy. And you can have actually hierarchies on each level. That's the thing.
Yeah, I think what one specific type of the level 2 coordination of level 2 we usually call it like portfolio, like a operational portfolio, which is basically if you do a project, it would be like project portfolio, right?
Yeah.
Let's say your chair service would be like a UX guy that usually very busy, right? There could be the project A is competing with project B to get the guy, right? If you, like Klaus said, use one stand up with the project A, okay, they need you. One stand up with project B, they need you. And eventually you got overload. But if you put this all together, it's like a portfolio type, and you can see that, there's a competing for this resource, and either A or B will get it, right? If A get it, B have to wait. If B get it, A has to wait. And we put the people that together to make the decision based on, the company objective or the company goal, and then they will make the right decision, because maybe people that the UX guy, maybe he doesn't really know if he do the A first, how would that cost the company, or if we do B first, how would it cost the company. So we put people that are supposed to make the right decision together and make it at that level.
And this is actually where we're somehow leaving, to a certain extent, the design of flight level 2 systems, because these are actually trade-off decisions you have to take when you're building a flight level systems architecture. So how are we actually designing? Not just what flight level 2 systems are we actually having? Yeah. That's how it is.
So there's a couple of cool questions coming up in the chat. I'm actually going to jump around a little bit in the order, because I think the flow works that way. Felipe is asking, he says, firstly, greetings from Paris. And he says, when building a flight level 2 information radiator, where do we start? How do we structure one? And then there's a slightly related question here from Rita Goodbody. She says, in your experience, who are the people who usually initiate the flight level 2 design? So I think these kind of questions, where do we start and who would be involved is kind of the question that I'm hearing here. What are your thoughts?
Okay. Well, one of the important lesson I learned from Mr. Klaus here, and in one of his class, he was saying that don't do it for them. But if, let's say, you want to design something, either information radiation or some system, but we basically it's a visualization board, right? And you see this nice idea. You attend Klaus class, and this is really nice board. And when you want to this great idea and you want to do it for your team, or and then you draw this up, this nice board and all this design and and the color and everything. What usually happens is that you get less ownership or less participant from all the people that you want to get them involved, and the recommendation or the guideline usually would be to get them involved and build it together with the people. So even it could be, I just talked to one of the participants in the class today. It could be just a silly, simple board. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be look really nice, but it's more important that people who actually going to work on that system start to build it together, because they will invest something in building that board, and once they see the problem, they will start to improve it and make it better.
Yeah.
It's funny to kind of quote someone who's hanging out with us, but I heard Klaus say it once, is that we don't build flight level systems for people, we build them with people. And I really like that sort of just simple framing. Is the point is that, like you say, Kulawat, it's not that we go and design a system for some set of people. It should be those people that are involved. But I guess the question kind of wrapped up inside this is sort of, well, how do we decide who to involve? Like, who's actually affected by this system? And that obviously also connects a little bit, I think, to Felipe's question. How do we structure one? What's actually, what's involved in this? Klaus, I think you were going to add something.
I just wanted to make one more point. But I'm not sure if I'm going ahead or just staying where we currently are. But this, don't build stuff for people, build it with people. I just want to add one more sentence to this, or one more thought to it, because I think that's somehow rooted into flight levels. Flight levels is not like a hierarchical model where you have, senior management, middle management, and people who are doing the work. Flight levels is totally, free of hierarchies. It's an operational model. The idea is like this. So on flight level 1, we have a team. And this team has the problem that it cannot deliver alone to the market, because it needs other teams to coordinate with because they are working on the same product. And now the magic happens because now these teams, they talk to each other and they build a flight level 2 system. So it's the teams who build their own flight level 2 system. There is not a flight level 2 manager or flight level 2 hero or something like this who steps in and says, oh, I know that we need for you guys a team. So it's rooted in this idea that the teams collaborate and they build a flight level 2 system where they can coordinate. And now they send delegates to the stand-up meeting, for instance, have a conversation there, and then they go back to their team and have a stand-up meeting there. And that's how we ensure that information is actually flowing across multiple teams. And we can do it even one step further, and even the flight level 3 system can be built by the teams. So again, the idea is, okay, now we have a great product board or something like this, maybe multiple product boards, but now we need to have like a strategy. So where are we going as a company? So this means the product people who are actually the same, like the flight level 2 people, who are the same as the flight level 1 people, they build the flight level 3. So, and this is like the model behind the flight level. So it's not like that. I mean, maybe in companies you have dedicated roles or something like this who are like, okay, I'm working on a strategy or so, then these people will work on a strategy, of course. But this has nothing to do with flight levels. Flight levels is really like, you can see it like just said. The rest is just like organizational culture or whatever already there.
Well, let me add something. So what you mentioned, let's say we have, a few teams, really like a development team that need to coordinate together, and probably with some operation team, right? And when we say team here, it's may not be like a team that's written in the job description that you are a team, but usually at some point we call flight level a decision making model. If you think about you are in a team, the decision that you can make within the team, that's fine because you're working together, right? But there's some other decision that your team alone cannot make it, and you need to coordinate with other team. Probably not the whole team, but probably someone like a delegate or representative, right? A few people from this team, a few people from the other team, they come together and have to bring something from their team and make decision together. So these people would be a good start on there'll be people who build the flight level 2 system because they have to use the system and have to make the decision together moving forward.
What I've often suggested to people is if you start out with the context that you can currently influence, and then you just move sort of to the left and the right from there. So you go towards kind of the customer result, and you go all the way back to the customer kind of need on the left-hand side. If you sort of consider, well, we stop over here at done, but it turns out actually that there's quite a few steps beyond that where the customer can actually get some value. If we just keep basically going from towards the left and the right, eventually we reach sort of the beginning and the end of the value stream. And then usually at that point, we've included a fair number of the folks who are involved in building those things for that customer. So I guess the question always is like where to start. And it's like, well, you have to start somehow where you have influence. You can't necessarily change the whole company. So we can influence this right now, but we know the value stream is maybe there. As you grow and develop and kind of demonstrate your thinking, it can be helpful to kind of move a little bit to the left and right as you explore and find out more. Yeah.
It's spread out like a virus, which is not a good language these days.
So I'm curious, from your experiences, a lot of the times I get asked, well, what kind of things are we visualizing on our level 2 system? So this kind of idea of, is it all the work? And I often see people kind of starting out, it's like, yeah, but we've got all the tasks and stories. We know about all of that sort of stuff. So why do we do it again with the same teams? And so I'm curious, what are your experiences and thoughts in terms of what kind of things would you want to see visualized on a flight level 2 system? And how do you avoid that thing of just like duplicating everything that was already done in a lot of detail? Like, how do you get people to zoom out and find the appropriate level?
Good question. Who shall start?
Well, I'm still thinking about how, but usually I think that the keyword there is zooming out, right? Because usually if you're in a team, you pretty much focus on your task, right? On stories, maybe, right? But when your story might not be so interesting to the other team because they they don't really care. They just want, when are you going to be done something that can release them to go do something else, that this dependency thing, right?
Yeah.
So usually it's like a zoom out of a bigger picture, whatever you call it, right? It could be features, it could be epic, it could be, one big thing, I don't know, it depends. But usually it's more like a one step of abstraction beyond what your team really focus on.
Yeah.
And how to get people to zoom out, and I would say, go back to the question before that, people that make decisions together, what are they interested in? What would they want to see?
Yeah.
What do they want? Well, that's how you answer what should be visualized in the board, is to answer the question, what do you want to see? If you don't really care about the detail, then you probably don't want to put the details on the board.
Yeah, nothing to add from my side.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a different abstraction level.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would perhaps add to that is often what I see folks doing is focusing only on kind of the new product development work, kind of the project-based stuff. And so often what I suggest is to consider, like, what other things are there that consume some sort of significant chunk of capacity? And I actually, in my training classes, I use an example of a board where there is not only kind of blockers like major bug issues, product development, but also recruitment and improvement of that area. So the kind of change management work and also kind of hiring new people into the team. And the point is not to say that you have to put those exact topics on there, but just often what I see people doing is they plan about just the project work, but then they're spending also 20 or 30% of their capacity on maintenance and another 10 or 20% maybe on improving things and kind of, sort of the change management part of it. Probably it's a good idea if some of these things are also there so that you can balance that trade-off. Should I do the thing that Kulawat's asking for or the thing that Klaus is asking for? Well, if we put it all together on the board, we can take that decision as a group rather than just only when I talk to Kulawat or only when I talk to Klaus, which I think is important.
And I think the question from Pedro somehow ties into what we are just talking about, like, would Flight Level 2 work for incident management or just for projects? I think, Cliff, you gave a little bit of an answer already, right?
Yeah, I mean, I tell a story about a tribe that I worked with at Spotify that had exactly this. The team was, or the tribe of about 120 odd people. They were building a bunch of stuff that was on essentially would block release of the iOS and Android apps, which, despite the fact that they don't build the entirety of the app, if that can't go out, it means the whole of Spotify can't ship anything on, to mobile clients. So that was basically considered the top priority. We had to do a little bit of triage in order to understand, because I think often what people get stuck in that situation is they assume that every bug has to get fixed. And sometimes you could look at a bug and go, well, it only fixes one person once every never. So maybe we go, like, we'll take a pass, we'll fix the more valuable one. Or actually, the better way to do that would be to say, yeah, we do see that issue, but we think this other thing that we're working on is actually more important than sort of the incident management. But to Pedro's question, I would absolutely think that if it's the same people working on the work, or there's some kind of dependency between the teams, incidents and projects, I would want to see on there as well. And just to add the point on the recruitment side of things, I mean, Spotify was a pretty rapidly fast-growing company, but not every company is growing at the same rate. But the point was to get anything that is consuming a huge chunk of capacity. And so, I mean, we were hiring, 100 people in 9 months into this area. And so it was doubling in size, probably, twice in a year sort of thing. Significant chunk, not just for the hiring activity, but also for the onboarding people. And so putting that on there means that you give it a little bit of focus. And so when you're thinking about the big picture, you're not sort of thinking, only about the projects or only about your incidents. You have to, of course, balance. And that's part of the hard challenge of the trade-off.
Yeah.
Anyway, Klaus, you were going to say something.
Just one thing. Yes. And there's the other thing. So you can also think it from the other side, which is like, okay, I don't want to see each and every incident and each and every bug on this board as well. So maybe if this is something that is totally isolated, which one team can just solve, then just solve it. We don't have to have a discussion for, I don't know, something which is just like obvious, let's just do it, right? So I think, as you said, Cliff, it's about finding this balance. So I wouldn't say put all your bugs up on there or incidents, because I mean, it doesn't make any sense if I can just solve it on my own. But as long as others are involved, and if it's really like a chunk of our work, like everything what you just described, then it makes sense to put it on the flight level 3. So it depends again.
Well, flight level 2 has a nickname, right? Coordination level.
Yeah.
So if you need to coordinate, I think it makes sense to put it in flight level 2, right? If you have like incident management that you can manage alone by your team, it probably doesn't make sense to put it up. But a lot of time you cannot, just your team alone cannot solve it, because you have to work with some of the team to solve the problem. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Coordination, and if there's impact to other teams, I think that's also quite interesting. So maybe this is something that I can solve on my own, but still it impacts many other things in other teams. It also will make sense that we bring it up there, because it's multiple teams.
There's a cool question here. I think Guillaume Fidelis is asking, if I pronounce your name correctly, without thinking about flight level 3, we don't necessarily have the clear strategic priorities to ensure that level 2, know the clear strategic priorities. How then do we ensure that level 2 coordinates what matters? And I actually had this question coming up in one of the classes that I was running, just started yesterday, actually. And one of the clients that I've been working with, they were saying, well, we sort of starting to build this level 3 system. And I think what we realized in the conversation is that very often what's happening is that at level 3, you're coordinating the big chunks of activities, but the thing that is missing is actually the why part of the strategy. So it's not that there's the strategy is completely wrong. It's just the coherence level, or the level of clarity that's needed to say, yeah, we're doing these 10 projects or initiatives, but there is actually a reason. We just didn't connect it visually on the board to be able to say that. But of course, the question, I mean, it is kind of a little bit of, how do we actually make a decision about what matters at level 2? And I think this is an interesting question. What has been your experiences with this?
Well, isn't the question kind of answered by itself? we need level 3, but that's the idea, right? But I know, just something that I think if we don't have the luxury of starting at the level 3, because that would involve like top management and probably strategy people, right? But one thing that I sometimes use is to start to get people up there involved. Probably not the whole team, but at least someone that and show them the visibility. Even better if they're part of the decision making process. So at least they have some sense of the strategy view in them. So when they participate in the agile interaction, they can give some input, or at least some red light, stop there, you're going the wrong way. So that could be a good start.
I think also part of what I've suggested to people often is that the question is a little bit for me, are we trying to optimize for outputs or outcomes? And the thing that I remind people is that, yes, obviously we care mostly about outcomes, not just about outputs, but to have outcomes, we also do need outputs. And so the idea is, if you can't focus on the outcomes yet, or you don't yet know how to measure that, at least focus on getting something done, which usually means that it doesn't, like, to put it a certain way, it doesn't matter so much which one you pick to finish first, but just that you pick one and finish it first. And picking any one would probably be better than picking all of them at the same time. There is, of course, nuance and little asterisks around this, once you get into the detail. But generally speaking, if you pick all of your projects, finish them all in December instead of, one in January, one in February, one in March, it doesn't matter so much which one you pick. Anything done earlier is probably a better outcome for the vast majority of cases. So in the absence, Guillaume, what I would suggest there is to just try to at least get clear which one to pick. But that will often, as Kulawat and Klaus have mentioned, surface some of that conversation about, well, how do we pick? And why did we pick that one instead of this one? And then you can still have that conversation, but at least in the meantime, you've got a clear focus so that everybody can say, cool, that's number one. Let's put our energy on this one first.
Yeah.
Cool. So there were a couple of questions actually that were talking a little bit about metrics and some things earlier on. So I wanted to go back. Sasha Stores is asking, it says, would you determine WIP limits on flight level 2, for example, like always, capability, demand, classes of service based on historical data, or are there other things to consider? How would you consider if your system was balanced or WIP limited in a healthy way? What are your thoughts around this?
What to determine WIP limits?
So how would you determine the whip limits?
Okay. That's actually easy. So I think the very first thing is we need to make sure if whip limits is actually the right way to create focus. So today we were actually talking about 4 different ways how you can create focus. But let's assume a whip limit is the right way of creating focus. I have a quite pragmatic way of determining the correct whip limit. I'm pretty sure there's some sophisticated math out there where you can plug in numbers and I don't know, multiply a hypothesis with an estimate, and then the result is 3 and everybody's clapping. So I have more like a I don't know, a pragmatic approach, and it's like this: let's build our flight level 2 system. When it's done, let's just fill it with work, right? So we just put all the work that's in the, we just make all the work that's currently in the system visible, right? And now let's reflect. If we are totally happy with our delivery capabilities, this means we are meeting all our deadlines and we're delivering, like our time to market is just perfect. What I would do is, you have just found your perfect whip limit. You just count the number of items on the board, put the whip limit up there, and you're done. If you are like, okay, I think our delivery capability is not so good, so we don't meet all the deadlines, and we're also not so fast, then you would lower the whip limit. So again, just count all the items on your board and lower it by, let's say, 20% or something like this. And if everything goes too fast for you, you are much faster than the market actually in delivering stuff, you can start more work. This would be a pragmatic way to kickstart the whip limit, because I think in the beginning, it's not so important that you have the right whip limit. I even doubt there is the right whip limit in knowledge work. I can imagine there is the right whip limit for a production environment or so, but I doubt there is the correct whip limit for knowledge work. So this was a very long sentence, sorry. The point I wanted to make is it's not so important to come up with the right whip limit. It's rather important just to work in a focused system.
I actually have something to add to that whip limit thing, but I don't know if this is a Thai thing or is it some other global phenomenon, but at some point we even said, don't use whip limit.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I think the word limit has some psychological impact to people. As if you're agile coach, you attend class, you do the shipbuilding, and whip limits is cool, right? You have proof, mathematical proof, and that is a good thing. But when you try to implement it, I think it has to be careful a little bit. When you say, okay, now we have the board and we got a limit, that's kind of shocks a few people. That's like, why would you limit my needs or my requirements? It could backfire. But one nice thing that we could do, like what Klaus said, you start with the visualization, right? Visualization first, and then it will kind of naturally make people realize, oh, there's a bunch of stuff that you cannot do anyway. You keep pushing stuff in the system, there's no way you're going to finish that. Then people start to probably slowly realize that it doesn't make sense to put more stuff in, and that might be a more like not brutal way to force the limit, but kind of like get people involved and start to realize that just keep pushing stuff doesn't work.
There's a comment actually from MR Lemon, who is saying, we recently figured out the main limiting factor is the coordinating effort, so came up with the idea to limit work based on coordination complexity rather than the number of items. And that sounds a little bit, I didn't get asked the question, he says, any thoughts about this? But I think it sounds a little bit similar, is that, we're talking a little bit, not so much about saying, well, it has to be a number, but this idea that maybe we just sort of, I don't know, we have some sort of a feel, like beyond this too many things, it just starts to hurt our brain, or like all the coordination is kind of consumed, or we just know that things are going to explode beyond kind of a certain rate of things. And I like that. It's I don't know, I've seen so many organizations get completely caught up in like, what is the mathematically precise number, as if their system was somehow static and forecastable. And I know a lot of people will disagree with me on this, but I think it's helpful just to kind of say, well, which one actually comes first is more the question. Like, should we focus on this one before that one when we're faced with a situation, of dealing with one or the other. And so I often talk about this thing of don't let number 3 block number 1. If number 1 is the top priority, don't let number 3 block that unless, don't work on number 3 unless it wouldn't be blocking number 1. And so I think this is a little bit similar to what is being explored here.
So while we're talking about WIP limits, there is this question from Rick. Have you seen this, Tiff? Like, what are the other 3 ways of creating focus? Because I was saying, okay, WIP limits is one way to create focus, and there are other ways.
So the one I mentioned now of sequencing, so don't let number 3 block number 1, that would be one of the other examples.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And another example is, I can come up with an easy one, which is like time frames, something like sprints.
Time boxing.
Right? Time boxing.
Sprints, quarters, years, a time box, something like this. Yeah.
So it's like, okay, we only have a certain amount of time, and you don't start everything, but you start this amount of work that actually can be finished in this time period.
I realized something quite interesting the other day when we were talking about this, is that there's something quite different often about sprints and about when we do like quarterly and yearly plans, especially for yearly plans. I think built into a yearly plan is usually the assumption that people make, what do we want to deliver by the end of the year? Whereas often in the sprint case, it's what do we want to work on in the sprint, as opposed to what do we want to finish. And I think that's actually an important distinction for me, is that the purpose actually of a time box, like what am I going to focus my attention on for the next quarter? I mean, that's probably more helpful than not having it. But really, the point of time boxes is try to say, what do we want to have finished by the end of that time frame? And so the point of this is that the idea is actually to try to force you to size your work smaller so that it fits in the time box. That's actually the intent of it. It might be that some things don't fit inside a quarter, and so it has to be a year or something along those lines, which is sort of the eternal question. So arbitrarily just picking a 1 week sprints, this might be too small for you. But the point is that it's about finishing stuff, not about just working on stuff. And that really is the key distinction I think a lot of people miss in that space. So hopefully, Rick, this gives a little bit of a sense, an answer to your question. Klaus, you were going to add something. Go for it.
Just one thing to add on this, because that's really so important. So we had this conversation about it's about finishing and not about starting, just a couple of hours before in the workshop. And always think about one thing: starting work costs money, and delivering work brings money. So that's really what we want to achieve, actually. And yeah, as you said, time boxes or like time frames, it's about finishing stuff. And maybe just one thing, on flight level 1, I'm a huge fan of WIP limits. On flight level 2, it's somehow a mixture between WIP limits, but also time boxes could be quite beneficial, especially when the time boxes are somehow inherited from the flight level 3. If you, for instance, like work in like quarters on a flight level 3, outcomes that you want to deliver, it would make sense to even work with these time boxes, like with the 3 months kind of time box on a flight level 2. You can have WIP limits in addition, but yeah.
I have another thing pop up. I'm not sure is it something to do with it, but I just want to mention it. Because the word is not limit, but it's focus. Right? Some technique that we've been introducing, we call goal breakdown structure. Because usually when you start, like especially like a software project, you probably got a bunch of things to do and you have a list of features. You just start doing it one by one, but eventually it doesn't really have a focus, because at the end, a customer might not be able to, let's say, you need to wait for that feature, and that feature will actually do something, right? So when we use a thing called goal breakdown, it's basically, well, the big goal is to finish this product to a project to do whatever. But then what's your next smaller goal?
Yeah.
And focus on that goal so that you can produce something, and then you can learn from it, got the feedback. So eventually you all your team, all your coordination, you put all the effort into focusing on this smaller goal and create a focus on that one and get the faster feedback.
Yeah. And maybe to add,
there's a couple of questions, folks asking about. So we've mentioned 3 now. What's the 4th one? And yeah.
Before we go to this one, let's take the Sasha one, like time box on flight level 3, because we're just talking about time box. I would say yes. I'm pro time box on flight level 3. So I'm maybe not pro time box, but I like to create focus by closing the time funnel. So what does this mean? So it's really quite hard. Like for instance, on a flight level 3, what are the topics on a flight level 3? These are like strategic themes. We need digitalization. We need to lean our organization. We need, I don't know, a cultural transformation. So it's really quite hard to limit and prioritize on a flight level 3, right? So we need to have significant progress in all of these topics within the next 3 years. I cannot just say, okay, no, we don't do digitalization, right? So the thing is, how we are creating focus is by closing the time funnel. Yes, we need to have essential things need to be done within 3 years on all these topics. But what does this mean for the next year? So what we are doing is, here, we're closing the time funnel a little bit. And when we just say, okay, for the next year, these are the outcomes we want to achieve, we cannot achieve all the outcomes that we actually achieve in the next 3 years. But then we again ask the question, okay, and what does this mean for the next 3 months? So we are again closing the funnel, right? And this is how we actually can create focus, because as you already said before, Cliff, we're slicing the work smaller, and that's exactly the task, or one of the things that we need to do on the flight level 3. We need to close the time funnel, like from 3 years down to something that actually is where we can work on. Mm-hmm. So that's why I say yes, do something like time boxes on the flight level 3.
Cool. Hopefully that answers some of the questions, and there's some discussion in the chat about some of the other options as well. So yeah, cool to explore that. Yeah. I want to actually jump back to 2 questions that I think are a little bit related from earlier. And sort of talking a little bit about, well, the question here says, when designing flight level 2, are columns owned by teams, or is this an anti-pattern? And I'm going to connect it to the second question quickly, which is, it says, if each team builds its own level 2 system, would it not be highly disadvantageous to have a system where the teams are not fixed, but created on a project-by-project basis? And I think this is interesting because for me, kind of what the common question is how do we actually divide and structure the teams? And so I wanted to just sort of share a quick thought, and then I'm curious to hear what the 2 of you think about this. For me, very often what I see people do when they build a level 2 system is they replicate their existing organizational structure. So what you do is you say, well, we have these 10 teams that report to me, and so I build a flight level 2 system around them. But the reality is that if that structure was already working, you probably wouldn't need flight levels, because that structure would be kind of taking care of itself already. The point is that there's probably somebody in marketing or finance or in another tribe, another department, another technical area, something in product management, something in finance, whatever, that you actually want to try to connect. And so for me, the idea here is not to think about columns or boards as teams or as people. It's much more about the state of the work and how it fits together, if that makes sense. So this is why I kind of connect these 2 questions, because for me, it would be perhaps, I don't say completely an anti-pattern, because there are scenarios where it would make sense. But the goal here is that we're trying to connect the flow of value together, not to try to visualize just, okay, Kulawat works in this column and Klaus works in that column. And so one of the things that I often suggest to people to do is I show an example of one of the boards. Again, a lot of my examples are from Spotify, because that's where I spent the last 4.5 years working. But we had a board across a tribe that was think it, build it, ship it. And think it was mostly product management, design, this kind of work, but also some folks from tech. But by naming it something like think it instead of design or analysis, we avoid attaching people to this is just my column and that's only where I work. And so what it starts to do, and it was explicitly the point of building the system, was to actually connect those 2 sides of the think it and the build it, and then also, now that we've shipped it, what actually happened in the wild, connect those back together so that we are managing as a group for the flow of value to a customer rather than for the busyness or the delivery of my project. Yeah, it's not just about did I deliver my project or did that team have something to do, but kind of this overarching sort of a thing. I asked the question. I've tried to give a little bit of my own thought on it. I'm curious, Klaus and Kulawat, what would you add in or comment on regarding this question?
Well, I have quick things to add. Well, kind of indirect to the question, but because we train on so much on roles that we usually stick with role. Role is kind of like defining who we are or who I am in the organization, and a lot of times it's difficult for us to step across our role, right? Even though we can do it, but sometimes we feel guilty or that's not my place or anything. But what I usually talk to people about this is I would tell them to try to shift from the role mentality to skills. We can have multiple skills. Sometimes I could be a developer who have a designing skill. I could be a tester who have business analyst skill, which means I can do this in that column and probably jump to do that in the other column if it needed. It's not so much I reside or I stay in the column, right? Like Cliff mentioned, it's the state of the work, which could involve multiple people, which could involve some specialists, or it doesn't matter, but it's the state of the work, not the people.
Yeah, and I like what Jose just wrote in the chat. So if the column represents like the roles, he would call it a role flow, and the other thing is like a workflow. I really like this. So Jose, he actually came up with another very smart thing. If I scroll up a little bit here, it was like sorry, I'm jumping back now. It was about creating focus. So paying attention to the aging of work also helps manage WIP, because we were talking about time boxes and so on and so on. I think, Jose, you just discovered a fifth thing of how to create focus, because I really think it somehow makes sense. I mean, we need to somehow think about, okay, how to kickstart the initial kind of thing, but then just paying attention to the WIP age is actually really smart. Jose, please bring this into our next Flight Levels Guides call. We need to elaborate around this, because I really like this idea. Haven't thought about this, but it makes a lot of sense. Cool. Sorry, we were talking about something totally different, but I saw this and I was always thinking, like, oh, this makes sense. So how is it possible?
I just want to check in and see Robert and Christoph. Do you feel like you got some useful answers to your questions, hopefully? If you'd let us know in the chat, that's super cool. So we are coming not quite to the end yet, but we are perhaps a little bit towards the end of the time. I wanted to open a little bit of a topic about how do we measure progress. So how do we tell if we're building a Flight Level 2 system that it's providing some value? What would we tend to see? Maybe what metrics, what outcomes, this kind of a thing. How do we know if it's going in a generally good direction?
Well, usually when, I don't know if it's related question, people ask me how would you, it's not like agile question in general, how you define that we're doing the right thing or we're on the right track. And usually I would say, don't measure on the process, but measure the outcome, right? If your outcome is to like make better quality or like time to market, make a faster time to market, or even get more money, more revenue, then measure that. And if you go on the way that you think it should be, then you're on the right track.
And I'm not sure if I understood the question totally correct, but I was like, okay, how do we measure progress, right? So I think the first is, what do we want to achieve? So I think that's the first thing that we need to have a common understanding about. So, and then we can measure progress towards what we actually want to achieve. So I'm not a fan of just let's come up with, I don't know, 5,000 measurements, because we can. It's more like, okay, what do we want to achieve? And then let's set up a measurement which tells us, are we on the right track? So a measurement it acts of two fundamental things. One is like, it acts as a feedback loop, which tells us, are we getting closer to the thing that we want to achieve? And the other thing is, it acts also as a, let's say, tool for common understanding. Because, for instance, if I say I want to improve quality, perfect, everybody's probably clapping, because improving quality is always good. But how do we measure that quality is actually improved? Is it there are less bugs in our bug tracker, or is it I don't know, less calls in our support center? So how do we actually measure it? And this is the other thing which is actually quite important when it comes to metrics or measurements. And Cliff, what do you think?
I was just going to sort of give a +1 to the point of actually aligning on the agreement of what is the goal of this. I think very often you see this kind of like, exactly like you said about quality, you know, we can't disagree, but it's not clear enough what actually do we mean by quality. And so one of the first things we do when we build a flight level system is ask people to spend some time actually aligning and defining on what is the purpose of the system, because it could be many different things, and it's very easy for people to kind of just throw their own assumptions in. And if you're quite specific and clear about it, it usually does help. And also to try to put some kind of well, if it's quality, what do we actually mean? Is that, you know, a number of bugs? Is it an impact of the bugs? Is it, you know, how quickly or easily do we detect them? Like, what do we mean? Let's put something down there that we can start to see, okay, after some weeks or months, how is it helping? And of course, you might get some additional benefits and so on, but I think being clear on what the most important ones, that's a huge aspect of it. Yeah. There's a cool question actually from Tobias, I guess Tobias Gass. It says, how do you get from your quality measurement or metric to a direction of improving the system?
That's something for you, Cliff.
Yeah, I mean, I can try to say some things about this, because I think part of the challenge is that, like, when we start out, a lot of the time the focus for me is often about, like, how do we pick the right metrics? But the reality is that I think about sort of measuring progress and outcomes is actually a little bit of a journey. So the point I make is that it's not that you pick one metric and then just say, well, for the next 25 years, that's the number we chase and it's all done. I would expect that you, just like building your system, you would do something and then you would look at that number and start to go, actually, I'm not so sure that that's quite clearly enough defined, or it's actually not maybe having an effect in the way that we thought it would. And so it would change. And the sort of, I guess, meta level or slightly ironic thing of it would be that actually I would see the sign of good improvement is that your system is changing and evolving. So if your metrics are exactly the same from 6 years ago, I don't know. I mean, is your company perfect, or did you not learn something, or did you just not change the numbers? And so this kind of a thing of like changing the numbers, changing the design, changing things as a result of it, and trying to be able to at least construct some kind of a clear story that explains why did we make those changes? Like, well, you know, we started measuring number of bugs, and then what happened was we just noticed that less bugs got reported, but the system still is buggy. Well, maybe that's not a good measure for quality. How do we assess that? Maybe we include some sort of customer satisfaction, or, you know, how often do customers experience downtime or outages? And like, there's always some nuance to unpack. And so finding a way to evolve and improve that conversation would be, I think, my thoughts, at least, on this. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Cool. So we are nearly at the end. Before we close off for today, I want to remind everybody one last time, if I can, if you've enjoyed the conversations that we've had, super cool if you would hit the like and subscribe button. As we like to joke and say, the first rule of Flight Club is to always talk about Flight Club. So tell your friends, your family, your auntie, your uncle, your pets, and so on. Get everybody to come along next time. It would be super cool to have you join us. And just as a final question, what I'd like to put perhaps both to Kulawat and to Klaus, if you have one tip for people starting out with building Flight Level 2 systems and doing Flight Level 2 design, what one tip would you suggest to the folks on the live stream?
I'll go first so you can close. One thing would be, I believe there is no best practice. So if you read some books like Rethinking Agile, or you attend Klaus Kite and he's saying, oh, this is the way, don't believe him. Everything is a journey. Do something and evolve. There's no best practice.
Well, this is actually something similar what I wanted to say. So I always say, okay, it's the latest state of misunderstanding. So don't try to find the perfect system, but start with a system, but make sure that you're improving. So usually reality is always smarter as what you are able to come up in a 2-day workshop or something like this. So I think it's not so important that you start with the perfect system. It's way more important that you improve the system, and don't build it for people, build it with people. That's the second one.
Yes.
Can't emphasize it enough. What is
Cool.
yours, Tim?
I was going to emphasize this point of involving people. I learned about this cool thing. I think it was Joel Spolsky that talked about this. He talks about this idea of a hallway usability test. Basically, what that means, walk out into your hallway at your company office or jump on your company Slack or something, grab any 3 people at random and say, what do you think about this? And get some input from just a completely blank point of view and see what you get. And you'll be amazed how often somebody will go, huh? And you go, oh, okay, cool. Or they go, oh, that's actually really cool. I get it. Like, that makes a lot of sense. But you get some input. And I think doing this, just grab a few people, some little bits of data will help you to go a long way in terms of your pitch, your board design, your metrics, all your ideas, whatever it is, test it out with some real humans.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. So before we go, I want to thank everybody for joining us on the live stream and for bringing your questions. It's made this a very interesting conversation for me, at least, and hopefully for all of you on the live stream. And then I want to say a special thank you to Kulawat and to Klaus for staying away from the beer and hanging out with us. You're allowed to go and have a beer now, I guess. Yeah, and the food. Yeah, of course, very, very important. So yeah, thanks so much for making time to join all of us. And Kulawat, have fun, look after Klaus, and yeah, have fun. And yeah, we'll see you all when you're older. We will be back again, most likely after the new year, because it is, of course, coming up to holiday season now. Yeah, so see you all in the new year. Have a lot of fun. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Cheers. Thai food now.